not a moment that doesn't pass where I don't think about them, or I don't feel the pain in my chest.
She survived a crash that killed 2 people she loved. Then she went from courtroom headlines straight to a locked cell most people forget exists. But what happens inside those walls tells a very different story from what you saw in the documentary. Prison records, a job nobody expected, a legal fight that keeps ending the same way, and a claim from her own mother that might change how you see everything that happened next. Before we get into what really happened to Mackenzie Shirilla after sentencing, you need to understand one thing. The court is not done with her yet. Mackenzie Shirilla is not living the life she had before July 2022. Back then, she was a teenager with a growing TikTok following, clothing brands sending her free samples, and a boyfriend she had been with for 4 years. Today, she is an inmate at the Ohio Reformatory for Women in Marysville, Ohio, serving 2 concurrent sentences of 15 years to life. She was convicted in August 2023 of murdering her boyfriend, Dominic Russo, and their friend, Davion Flanagan, after she drove her Toyota Camry into a brick building at close to 100 miles an hour. She will not be eligible for parole until 2037. That number is worth sitting with for a second. 2037. She was 17 when the crash happened. She will be in her early 30s before a parole board even looks at her case. For most of her 20s and half of her 30s, her daily life will be decided by prison routine, not by her. And that routine changed recently. In a phone call from prison, later obtained and reported by TMZ, Mackenzie complained to her mother, Natalie, about how bored she was during the day. Not long after that call was released, on June 11, 2026, a spokesperson for the Ohio Reformatory for Women in Marysville, Ohio, confirmed to Us Weekly that Mackenzie now has a job inside the facility. She works in food service. Inmates at the prison can earn up to $24 a month for jobs like this one. $24 a month. Compare that to a life where companies used to send her free clothes to promote. That contrast alone tells you how far her life has shifted in less than 4 years. Her parents say she spends the rest of her time painting and journaling. They told 3 News Investigates that she also watches movies using a controlled tablet system inside the prison, the kind that only plays approved content. Natalie and Stephen Shirilla say they stay in contact with her every single day. To them, this paints a picture of a daughter coping the best she can inside a system she should not be in at all, according to them. But that is not the only picture being painted. Reports have also surfaced showing Mackenzie's disciplinary file inside the prison, and according to those records, she has repeatedly broken rules during her time there. The exact nature of every violation has not been made fully public, but the pattern described in those files does not match the version of a quiet, remorseful young woman that her family presents in interviews. Then there's the account from someone who was actually locked up with her. A former inmate named Mary Catherine Crowder, who goes by Kat, spoke to News Nation after the Netflix documentary about Mackenzie came out. Crowder said watching Mackenzie on screen in the documentary did not match what she saw in person. She described Mackenzie inside the prison as walking around with what she called a light demeanor, not the emotional, guarded person shown in the documentary interview. In her words, the version presented on camera did not line up with the young woman she says she spent time with behind bars. So here is what we actually know for certain. A convicted double murderer is now earning $24 a month serving food in an Ohio prison. Her parents describe her as struggling, remorseful, and mentally trapped by a crash she says she does not remember. A fellow inmate describes something closer to a person who seems, in her words, lighter than expected. And prison paperwork shows a disciplinary history that raises its own questions. 2 very different portraits of the same 21-year-old woman. One from the people who love her the most, one from someone who watched her live day to day in the one place cameras usually cannot reach. Before you continue this story, take a second to hit subscribe and share this video. It genuinely helps more people find this case, and there is a lot more here you need to see. Now, let's get back into it. After Mackenzie Shirilla was convicted in August 2023, her legal team did what almost every convicted defendant's lawyers do. They appealed. The first appeal went to the Ohio Court of Appeals and directly challenged her conviction. Her lawyers raised several arguments. One focused on the county medical examiner, Dr. Thomas Phalo, who had amended his official determination on the manner of death during the case. SHIRILLA's defense argued that a medical examiner does not have the legal authority to change that kind of ruling without a court ordering it first. Her team pointed to earlier Ohio case law to support that argument. Her defense also leaned heavily on medical evidence. SHIRILLA has a diagnosed condition called POTS, which stands for Postural Orthostatic Tachycardia Syndrome. It is a real disorder that can cause dizziness and sudden blackouts. Her lawyers argued this condition, or possibly some other medical event like a seizure or a heart problem, could explain why she never hit the brakes before the crash. They also raised the idea that it could have simply been reckless or distracted driving, not an intentional act. The Court of Appeals reviewed all of it and was not convinced. In its ruling, released in September 2024, the court pointed out that witnesses who saw SHIRILLA and Russo shortly before the crash, including her own mother, testified that the couple seemed to be in a good place in their relationship and did not appear upset or in danger. The court also noted that a detective testified SHIRILLA had a documented pattern of driving distracted or recklessly based on her own social media activity. Weighing everything together, the court ruled that the evidence did not weigh heavily against her conviction and it upheld the verdict. Her murder conviction stood. That was the first loss. It would not be the last. Her legal team then tried a different route, a petition for post-conviction relief. This is a separate legal process from a direct appeal. It allows a convicted person to raise new issues, often based on evidence that was not part of the original trial record. But in Ohio, this kind of petition comes with a strict deadline. Once trial transcripts are officially filed with the court, a defendant generally has 365 days to file this kind of petition. Miss that window, and the court usually won't even look at what you're arguing, no matter how strong it sounds. This is exactly what happened to SHIRILLA. Prosecutors said the clock started on October 23, 2023, the date her trial transcripts were noted as filed on the court docket. Her attorneys filed the post-conviction petition on October 24, 2024, 1 day late. Her legal team argued the deadline should not have started that early. They said the clock should have started in December 2023 instead, when transcripts from her juvenile bind-over hearing, the hearing that decided she would be tried as an adult, were filed separately. Under that theory, her October 2024 filing would have been on time. The Ohio Court of Appeals disagreed. In a ruling released in March 2026, the court said SHIRILLA had a full and complete trial transcript and that a separate juvenile hearing transcript did not change when her deadline started. Her attorneys also tried arguing for something called equitable tolling, essentially asking the court to excuse the late filing because of confusion around how leap years affect day counts. The court rejected that too, saying Ohio law governing post-conviction petitions does not allow for that kind of excuse the way some federal cases do. So her petition was dismissed as untimely, not because a judge decided her medical arguments about POTS or ineffective legal help were weak. The court never even got that far. It was thrown out over a filing deadline missed by 24 hours. That's the part almost nobody talks about when they cover this case. The legal system did not fully weigh whether SHIRILLA's new evidence had merit. It ruled that the door to even ask that question had already closed before her new attorneys got involved. After losing at the Court of Appeals in March 2026, SHIRILLA's legal team did not stop. Around the same time, the Netflix documentary The Crash drew new attention to her case in May 2026. Her lawyers filed one more appeal, this time going straight to the highest court in the state, the Ohio Supreme Court. This appeal, filed on April 27, 2026, tried again to argue the post-conviction deadline started later than prosecutors claimed. It also raised a claim of ineffective assistance of counsel, arguing that her original trial attorney did not properly investigate her POTS diagnosis as a possible medical explanation for the crash before the case went to trial. On June 25, 2026, the Ohio Supreme Court ruled. It declined to review her case. The court's reasoning followed the same pattern as the lower court. It found that the post-conviction petition was filed late and that the trial court did not have the legal authority to excuse that delay based on the arguments her team presented. Under Ohio law, judges can't simply choose to forgive a missed deadline unless very specific legal exceptions apply, and the court ruled that SHIRILLA's situation did not meet them. There was one dissent. Justice R. Patrick DeWine did not agree with the majority's decision, though the court's ruling stood regardless. This is the third time SHIRILLA's legal team has tried to get a new trial or a new hearing, and the third time the answer has come back no. And here's the part that matters most going forward. Each of these losses has come down to procedure, not proof. Courts have not been ruling that her medical claims are false or that her lawyer definitely did a good job. They've been ruling that the legal window to even argue those points was already shut before her new attorneys got involved. That pattern matters if you're trying to understand what happens next. Ohio's post-conviction rules are strict on purpose, designed to bring finality to criminal cases. Once a deadline like this is missed, courts have shown again and again in SHIRILLA's case that they are not willing to bend the rule, even when new medical arguments or ineffective counsel claims are on the table. Unless her team can find an entirely new legal avenue, one that doesn't depend on this same post-conviction window, the odds of a different outcome in future filings don't look strong based on how every court has ruled so far. Her first chance at parole remains set for 2037. Right now, based on everything courts have said in the last 2 years, that may be the next real turning point in this case, not another appeal. Before we move on, a quick thank you to everyone watching and supporting this channel. Your presence truly keeps it alive. This community keeps growing because of people who believe in real, honest storytelling. Becoming a channel member unlocks exclusive extras and behind-the-scenes content, and it directly helps us keep bringing these stories to light. We'd love to know who's here. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. If you're still with us right now, type "I'm still here" in the comments. Let's see who makes it to the end. And if you haven't already, tap that like button. Now, let's get back into it. Just 2 days after the Ohio Supreme Court turned down her case, Natalie SHIRILLA, Mackenzie's mother, sat down for an interview on Chris Cuomo's podcast, Crime Time. What she said there is some of the most direct language she's used publicly about her daughter's situation. Natalie described Mackenzie as being trapped in a nightmare that she has no memory of. According to Natalie, her daughter has never actually reviewed the evidence from her own case. Not the discovery documents, not the surveillance footage, none of it. In her words, Mackenzie is living through the consequences of a night she can't even remember without ever having sat down and gone through what the state says happened. This claim deserves to sit next to everything we already know. Prosecutors built her case using an event data recorder from the car itself, which showed no braking before impact and the accelerator pressed all the way down. They used surveillance footage. They used testimony that Mackenzie had, on more than one occasion, threatened to crash her car, including once with Russo actually in the passenger seat weeks before he died. A friend on the phone during one of those incidents told police she heard Mackenzie screaming that she would crash the car. So you have two things that are both true at the same time according to the people involved. Mackenzie's mother says her daughter has no memory of that night and has never gone through the evidence herself. And the trial record contains testimony, phone evidence, and vehicle data that painted a very different picture for the judge who convicted her. Then there's the documentary itself. In The Crash, Mackenzie spoke on camera for the first time since her sentencing. She appeared with her lawyer present. She talked about not wanting to say too much or come across, in her own words, sounding crazy. She brought up her POTS diagnosis again as a possible explanation. She said not a single day passes where she doesn't think about Russo and Flanagan's deaths. But remember what former inmate Kat Crowther said. She watched that same documentary and said Mackenzie's on-screen demeanor did not match what she witnessed in person, describing someone with a much lighter attitude behind bars than what viewers saw in the interview. This is where the case sits right now. A mother describing her daughter as a person trapped by amnesia and unfair treatment, a trial record built on data, testimony, and threats made before the crash, a documentary interview aimed at humanizing Mackenzie to the public, and a fellow inmate publicly pushing back on how that interview came across. Two families lost people they loved on July 31st, 2022. Dominic Russo was one of 7 siblings. He loved basketball and had plans to start his own clothing line. Devon Flanagan was a football player who wanted to become a barber. His family has since started a scholarship fund in his memory. Both families have said the years of appeals have been exhausting, describing it as one hearing after another with no end in sight. Every appeal Mackenzie's team files is not just a legal event. For the Russo and Flanagan families, it means reliving the worst night of their lives all over again. There's a phrase that came up during the making of the Netflix documentary. The prosecutor who worked the case, Tim Traup, described this case as having a black hole at its center. Not the crash itself, not the courtroom, not the appeals, the actual moments inside that car in the seconds before impact. What was said, what Mackenzie was thinking, why she never touched the brakes. Nobody outside that car will ever know that part for certain. But there's more to this story that hasn't made it into most of the coverage you've seen so far, including new pushes from Dominic Russo's family around something being called Dom's Law, records tied to Mackenzie's time behind bar that go beyond what we covered today, and more detail about exactly what investigators found when they went through her phone. We're going to get into all of that in the next video. If this video helped you understand this case better, do us a favor. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Give this video a like if you made it this far, and share it with someone who needs to see it too. We'll see you in the next one.